千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Let's continue our discussion of 38. I want to do a quick recap and identify the place where we left off last time, and then continue from there. So the very first thing that we did with 38 was just show the entire chapter altogether from line 1 to 29. Like I said, one of the longer chapters in the Tao Te Ching. Fortunately for us, this chapter can be divided into two parts. In a logical way, it talks about one thing, the high and low, meaning the high level and low levels of the different aspects that we spoke of, the high virtue, low virtue, and then the high benevolence, high righteousness, and high etiquette. So different levels. Then in the second half, it's about what happens when you lose a particular level and have to descend into the next one. What happens when the world strays far away from the Tao, descends into chaos. So the second part I've noted that it's about loss of the Tao. So toward the bottom, and most of our discussion today is going to be about that. And we then divided up the two parts to discuss separately. Still doing the recap, last time we went at it with the top half from line 1 to line 15. And line 15 is where we ended. So what did we learn so far? In the first quarter, or the first half of the first half, from line 1 to line 8, it's all about high virtue and low virtue. 上德, 下德, 上德, 下德. So that goes on for a total of 8 lines. And it's about high virtue and low virtue and the distinction between the two. So we went into that pretty deeply, and I think everyone is pretty comfortable now. 上德, high virtue, is the natural state where the virtue flows without you having to think about it. Low virtue is when you need to remind yourself, when you need to do a lot of practice to get to the level where it is natural, which is the high virtue. So as with everything else in life, everything follows a pattern like this. Any aspect of learning that you get into, regardless of what it is, could be a language that you learn, could be a new skill, could be music. You begin at the level of low virtue where you have to practice constantly. Then at some point, it's second nature to you, and you go into the high virtue, which in English we would describe as the virtuoso state. In that level, you can express yourself freely. You don't have to think about the interaction between you and the instruments of learning. You simply use the skill as if it was a natural extension of you. So that's high virtue. Then we get into high benevolence, righteousness, and etiquette. And as I mentioned before, the distinction between the different levels here can be very subtle. So it may be confusing. The story that I talked about last time described high righteousness, which was all about doing the right thing at the right time in the right way for the right reasons. Now, righteousness is pretty low in terms of the overall place As you can see, we start with high virtue and then low virtue and then high benevolence and then high righteousness. So that's because it is positioned logically. So what the ancient sages had noted was that you could be right, you could be just, you could be fair, and yet lacking in kindness, compassion, and benevolence. When comparing the two, remember, kindness, compassion, benevolence is still above being right. And this is one of the reasons why the ancient sages cautioned us in their admonishment about debates. You can win a debate, you can be right, and you can be completely devoid of compassion, not taking the other person's feeling into account, crushing them utterly, creating an enemy, creating bad karma, creating negativity. So even though the distinctions are subtle, it is possible to understand exactly what they were getting at. And finally, we got into agenda in terms of being at the level of high etiquette. And also with righteousness, the agenda side of it is also troublesome for many people to understand. When we say high benevolence is without agenda, we just mean that when you are trying to help other people, you are, by definition, being selfless. Your thoughts at the level of high benevolence is all about the well-being of someone else. Now, righteousness always has an agenda, and it's for things like enacting justice, doing what's right, and punishing, etc. The punishing side of it is the clear example of how being righteous can be a relative absence of compassion. Lastly, in etiquette, we talk about etiquette being very contrived. A good example that we talked about previously was politically correct. Someone who is very politically correct, well, that may be a facade hiding agenda. That may be fake and phony. So that's what we talked about previously, that the hypocritical behavior of high etiquette is that they want everyone to conform. If you do not conform, then they will force you to conform. So that's the recap for that. Let's do a quick preview of what we're getting into today. This is from line 16 all the way down to line 29. So the very first thing we're going to talk about from 16 to 19 is about the different levels, what happens when one is lost and you have to descend into the next level. Then from line 20 to line 29, it's one big thing. It's about the people who have etiquette being really a negative thing. And then the people who have, quote unquote, foreknowledge also being very negative. And I will talk about exactly why that is negative. This is usually the part where people stumble over because in the West, we're very used to thinking about knowledge is power and having more knowledge is better. So Lao Tzu says the opposite, that no, knowledge is actually not the best. It's actually wisdom that is aligned with the Tao, not knowledge. Knowledge can be dangerous. So we'll explore the reasons why he thought so. So with that, let's continue our recap on some of the slides, just hitting the highlights from last time. So in this particular slide, the focus is on line 9, which is about high benevolence. So this goes into a detailed explanation about why high benevolence acts without agenda. Continuing with the recap, we also talked about, right after high benevolence, we talked about high righteousness, how that's different, how that is action with an agenda. And you'll see at the bottom of the slide, the specific intention that is the agenda will be justifying yourself. It will be there will be some sort of reason for you to want to enact justice. You want to right a wrong. You want to support the right cause, etc. Restoration, stuff like that. The story that I used to illustrate that, the level of high righteousness, is from the warring stage period, where this particular man serving Lord Menchang, Meng Changjun, Lord Menchang is the translation. Meng Changjun, he was known to be a generous lord, and he sent this particular man to collect some debts. And what he decided to do was that he decided to, quote unquote, purchase yi, to buy righteousness. Well, how could that be? Righteousness is an abstract and intangible concept. Well, in the illustration provided by the story, you could see that what he did is what we today would call to plant the seeds of positive karma. Now, he knew that one could not literally purchase something intangible like righteousness, fairness, doing something good with money. What he could do was to plant the seeds of kindness, forgiveness, knowing that later on, when the need arose, the people will repay, and the karmic mechanism that we talk about today in ancient times would simply be the circular action of the Tao. It will turn things around and magnify many times to bring the goodness back to you. So the details are in the story from last time. And then what we did was that we proceeded to explain the concept of benevolence and righteousness from the perspective of another sage. So Mengzi, or Mencius, his words are recorded in a book with his name. Mengzi is the name of the book and also the name of the ancient sage. It's collected in one of the 9 books known as the 4 books and 5 classics. So the arrow that you see there points to Mengzi. From that collection, where he talked about benevolence and righteousness. He described benevolence, what we can also call kindness and compassion, as the heart of humans. That we human beings have a natural part of us that is compassionate, that is kind, that's benevolence, that doesn't really want to see anyone getting hurt, because we have natural sympathies for others. We're naturally empathetic. Mengzi described righteousness as the path of humans, meaning the right path, the path that we intuitively know we should walk. Doing the right thing, oftentimes there's an intuitive voice within us, the voice of conscience, that tells us the right thing to do. It's just that a lot of times we choose to ignore the whispers of conscience. So also from before, we got into the level of high etiquette, and this is described by Laozi as being almost entirely negative, although we know that etiquette serves a useful purpose in society. It's the way that we interact with one another. When we want to show courtesy and respect, we bring in etiquette. We conduct ourselves according to etiquette. So that's the moderate practice of etiquette in accordance with the Tao. It can be taken to an extreme, which is high etiquette, and that gets you into the realm of hypocrisy. And we often see people who are at that level, who are very contrived, who are preachy to other people, who are dogmatic, demanding, and wanting everyone to conform to the standard they have set, whereas they themselves may not actually be able to live up to those standards. So they later on will be identified as the source of chaos. So we'll get to that in just a moment. For now, the last slide in the recap is this one here, the different levels. So the arrows will point you to closer to the Tao, further from the Tao. The lower you go, the further you get from the naturalness of the Tao. The closest is high virtue. High virtue being natural, the natural expression of the natural virtues within you is only one step removed from the level of the Tao. In order to get back to the Tao, you traverse through all these different levels. Therefore, in traditional Tao practice, people begin by practicing rituals and etiquette. There's a reason for that. And it's actually a pretty important reason. And when you master the etiquettes, the rituals, you are better prepared to also practice being righteous, being benevolent, kind, compassionate to others. And all of this gets you ready to practice the virtues until they become a natural part of you so that you get closer to the Tao. So the last remark that I made was that a lot of times in society, people who don't know anything about the Tao, who have not delved into it deeply, tend to think that etiquette can only be a positive thing. We compliment other people when we say that they are so courteous and polite, and we like that. So it's actually at the lowest level in this ranking, and I hope that as we continue discussing, you will see exactly why. So that's it for the recap. Let's delve into the new stuff. Okay, let's take a look at line 16. Therefore, the Tao is lost and then virtue. So all that is saying is that when you lose the naturalness of the Tao, you descend to the level of virtue. The Tao is the ultimate level. Virtues, the level of virtues is one step below that. And it's the closest approximation to the naturalness of the Tao. So that is why, if the Tao is lost, this is the next best thing. And if you want to get back to the Tao, you must possess high virtue. Then let's explore line 17. Virtue is lost and then benevolence. The next best thing below the level of virtues is natural kindness, benevolence. Even in the world without virtues, one can at least hope for some kindness and compassion every now and then. So certainly kindness and compassion will qualify as a virtue. Now the level of virtues includes all other virtues as well. So it's more comprehensive, and that's why it's at a level above high benevolence. I hope that makes sense. Let's continue. What happens when benevolence is lost? Well, when you have a world that is unkind, lacking in compassion, without benevolence, then the best you can hope for is that at least it's fair, at least it's righteous. So it's important to note here that benevolence, kindness, compassion ranks above being right. So this concept is similar to a quote from the Dalai Lama that's become quite popular. He said, "I would rather be kind than right." So think about that. If we can think like the Dalai Lama, the next time we have an argument with someone, we will keep this in mind. I may be right, but am I also being unkind to the other person? The other person may be a loved one, maybe a family member, maybe a good friend, someone who does not deserve you being unkind to them. So when that realization sets in, and even if it's just with a total stranger, I think you and I will have a natural preference for being kind. And being right, yeah, I started out being pretty obsessed about that, about being right, proving myself to be correct, teaching them a lesson, quote unquote, destroying misconception, clarifying, educating, informing, all kinds of excuses that I have. But at the end of the day, it's better to be kind. It's better to take the other person's feeling into account. This doesn't mean that it's unimportant to talk about what is right. But when you understand what the Dalai Lama said, I would rather be kind and right, you figure out ways of expressing what is right without being unkind. And you would also refuse to engage further in contention. A contentious debate or argument does not advance your agenda. It does not make the rightness that you adhere to any more right than it was before. Let's continue on. So this is why in the Tao teachings we talk about, hey, don't engage in debates. There's no point. You can prove yourself right. It will likely be at the cost of your kindness. So in the West, we like to say at the end of a debate, especially if you win, hey, no hard feelings. But that's usually not the case. We say that, but it's a very thin veneer of what actually happens. You've already angered someone. You've already humiliated them, likely in public, and you will already have planted the seed of negative karma that will come back to haunt you. Not a great idea. So for all of those reasons that we just talked about, when benevolence is lost, the next level down is righteousness. It's all good and well to be righteous, but it's not as high in the estimation of Lao Tzu and Tao cultivators to be kind and compassionate. Okay, let's talk about the last level. When you are no longer righteous, not concerned about justice, when that has been lost, then all that is left is the superficiality of etiquette. The lowest level in this hierarchy is etiquette. So as noted here, can oftentimes be superficial and artificial, thus contrived, with agenda, etc. We see this in the world. We see this in our lives. We have seen people who can be very polite, but it's a mask hiding a dagger waiting to stab you in the back. So they can have perfect etiquette and yet be very much lacking in righteousness. So now I think you can see why righteousness ranks above etiquette. So etiquette alone is no guarantee of character and therefore cannot be trusted. Righteousness, knowing right from wrong, is more worthy of trust, and that's why it ranks above etiquette. So everything really does kind of make sense, and my goal is to get you to think exactly like the ancient sages. When they see things ranked above one another, and they have a sequence that is logical in their reasoning. Previously, I showed you a slide with a hierarchy from high virtue to low virtue, and then to the benevolence, righteousness, and etiquette, those 5 levels. Now, we have the same thing again, but in this section, it looks a little bit different. So I want to show it to you again with the revisions. In this new scheme, starting with when the Tao is lost, then we have virtues. Therefore, at the highest level is the Tao. Right below that is virtue. And then right below that, benevolence. As I said before, this is like kindness and compassion. And below that, righteousness. justice, and then below that, etiquette. So absence from this new scheme now is high level, low level. So this is sort of taking a step back, zooming out to see the whole hierarchy from top to bottom, including the Tao. So the same as before. The further up you go, the closer you get to the Tao. The lower you go, the further you are away from the Tao. So one thing that I want to ask everyone to pay attention to is that by ranking these from the highest to the lowest, Lao Tzu is specifying positive and negative, better and worse. He is actually passing value judgment. So I want everyone to be mindful of this because in the West, when we study this stuff, we oftentimes come across the idea that there's no good and bad, there's no better or worse, that one should not pass value judgment. Well, here you see an example where the ancient sages are doing exactly all of the above. Therefore, I want to say that in the authentic teaching of the Tao, one does not shy away from value judgment. Okay, so that would be a little bit unlike what we've been exposed to in the West, sometimes from some teachers, some books. And then the last point here is that in order to return to the Tao, you work your way back up the levels. So if we live in a world that is almost entirely devoid of the Tao, when people are just so frequently, so often being fake and phony to one another, then we have to get back up the levels. We have to cultivate high righteousness. We have to be kind and compassionate. We have to cultivate high benevolence. And then finally, we keep practicing the virtues until we reach high virtue, which will then bring us very close to the Tao. So the last statement that I have here, the practice of etiquette can be Tao 101. So anyone who is interested in rituals and etiquette, there's actually a PDF about that. So if you join the group at Facebook, you can easily download that PDF. It's several hundred pages. It's no light reading, but it's something that may be interesting to many people. So if you haven't seen it yet, I would urge you to download that at the earliest opportunity. Okay, now that we talked about the different levels, we're ready to talk about the things that Lao Tzu really objected to. There are things, qualities in people that he really disliked, that he really distrusted. And we start with those who have etiquette, line 20. So isn't that a good thing, those who have etiquette? Well, in this context, Lao Tzu is referring to people who we would describe as phony or hypocrites. They may appear proper and courteous, but the propriety and courtesy are just a facade. It's just a thin shell, which is exactly what Lao Tzu says. In the next line, let me break this down for you character by character. 忠, this means loyalty. 信, this means sincerity, faithfulness, trustworthiness. 知, this is the apostrophe S. So usually what we do in translation is that we turn that into of, OF, and then we flip these around to make it syntactically correct in English. And then the last character here, it means thin. So it doesn't read very well if you transcribe verbatim, loyalty and sincerity's thinness. What does that mean? Well, translation, thin shell of loyalty and sincerity. And that's describing the hypocritical behavior, the thin veneer, the phoniness, the fakeness of it all. So in particular, Lao Tzu notes they may appear to be loyal and sincere, because they follow all the proper forms of etiquette. They seem so courteous and polite, but the appearance is deceptive because it is only a thin shell. Hiding beneath the surface is the true nature of such individuals, scheming, plotting, looking out for themselves. So now you can see that this is something that Lao Tzu really objected to. Then he describes them in line 22 as the beginning of chaos. So the people who have etiquette that we might have thought of as being good people because they were so polite, they're actually the beginning of chaos. Now, let me break this down for you. There's an important character here. The second character in line 22, 乱. Pinyin, L-U-A-N, 乱. What is the meaning? Mess, disorderly confusion, unrest, in other words, chaos. So chaos and strife. Throughout the history of ancient China, there's been times of unrest, times of warfare, and warfare being hellacious, war being hell in ancient China as it is today in the modern world. The context of 乱 can range from personal issues all the way to civil wars. So 乱, if I say 战乱, that would be the chaos of warfare. That would be what I said just a moment ago, war is hell. Now 乱 can also be personal. If I say 乱 in association with you, it would be, for instance, the house is a mess. You can't find anything. When you are surrounded by clutter, you are not able to work at your best. You are not able to have peace of mind. So it's because of that, Lao Tzu would describe those who have etiquette being the beginning of chaos as being the sort to disregard, the kind of behavior to discard. So 乱 in this context is almost entirely negative. Of course, with the yin and yang symbol, you can always see that there's good within the bad, bad within the good. 战乱, warfare, strife, people suffering, misery. While occasionally that can bring about, the manifestation of goodness, kindness, when you are looking out for one another, when you're trying to save someone's life, as an example. So there can be some good associated in the middle of chaos. But that being said, Lao Tzu is completely against wars. So the Tao is the way of peace. So let's bring this point in. Throughout Chinese history, there have been many high officials who appeared loyal to the emperor, while secretly plotted to further their own ambitions. They were oftentimes the cause of strife and chaos. Let's continue on. We're going to talk about another category of people that Lao Tzu really disliked. 前世者, those with foreknowledge. Again, just like those with etiquette, this appears to be initially something good. A good person who's very knowledgeable, therefore deserving of respect. So what is Lao Tzu talking about? Well, it's similar to those with etiquette. 符礼者, 前世者, they are actually in the same category of being disliked by Lao Tzu. It may seem positive, but it's actually negative in this context. Let me explain why. Most people would assume that having foreknowledge is a good thing, but Lao Tzu is actually talking about those who have the appearance of knowledge and not the substance. So in other words, people who talk a lot about what they know. So this can be difficult to grasp in modern times because we're constantly told that knowledge is power. So it's going to take some work from us to really go deeply into why Lao Tzu sees it as such a negative thing. To begin with, here's the perspective of the Tao on knowledge. So this is not to cast aspersions. This is to basically see reality as it is today. Okay, so what does Lao Tzu say, or what do the Tao sages say as the reality about knowledge? I think you will recognize what they're saying as the truth. Number one, knowledge can be used for good or bad. It really depends on the individual. So knowledge of, for instance, physics can go into atomic weapons, nuclear bombs that result in mass killing. It can also be used, can be leveraged to better mankind. So easy to see that number one is true. Knowledge by itself is just a tool. It's up to you to use knowledge for good or bad. So knowledge isn't all positive, even though we in the West have sometimes been indoctrinated into thinking that knowledge is a good thing, more knowledge is better. And Lao Tzu would say, well, not necessarily. And history is on his side. History proves it. History proves that he is correct. Either way, by either way, I mean, if you use knowledge for good, or if you use it for evil ends, either way, knowledge can lead to arrogance. Even when you use it for good, it can still be something that swells up your ego. I think you can also easily recognize that as the truth. You've seen many examples of number one and two. Number three, the knowledge trap or knowledge obstacle can keep you from correcting a misconception or getting at the truth. So for this one, for number three, I have a slide on knowledge trap, and then I have another one on knowledge obstacle. So let's hold off on those until we can have a more complete discussion on what they are, what they mean, what they represent, and what the difference is between the two. Knowledge trap, 知识陷阱, a trap that you fall into being lured by knowledge, by the power of knowledge. And then knowledge obstacle, 知识障碍, when you are trying to better yourself and yet there's something in the way. So we'll get into that much, much more. For now, let's finish up. Number four. This is the last item here. Book knowledge without real life experience can be useless or even dangerous because it can mislead you to assume you actually know something. Perhaps all you really have is the stuff that's in the books, but unless you actually apply it to life, you don't really know how accurate or how applicable that is. And therefore, you may assume that you know something, but until you actually test it, until you actually prove it, with the golden test of real world testing, you don't know. And it may be misleading, cause you to become arrogant and think that you know something other people don't, that you have an edge over other people, that is what can be dangerous. Now we're going to get into a story about knowledge, specifically knowledge that is found as secret knowledge in ancient books, 古书. So once upon a time, there lived a scholar, and this scholar, the big thing about him was that he was into ancient books, books that were ancient to him. So he spent all of his time looking for ancient books in order to collect them. He studied these ancient books from cover to cover. And the reason why he did this was because they contained powerful secrets. That's what he thought. And that's what he told everybody. And he liked to tell everyone, our 老祖先, our ancestors, our remote ancestors, really knew what they were talking about, really knew what they were doing. So he would tell everyone, most people today have no idea how powerful their knowledge was. If it wasn't for a few intrepid explorers, mavericks like me, that knowledge would be lost forever. But thanks to my work, look at my collection, I have collected the powerful secrets from ancient times. So one day, he happened across a couple of books that really caught his attention. They both dated back 1,000 years from his time. One of them was a book on military strategies. The other one was a book about agricultural irrigation. He snapped them up. These became like his most valued, most treasured possessions. So he devoted the next couple of years to studying them. And he was not willing to share these powerful ancient secrets. So he studied behind closed doors. He guarded them jealously, didn't want to show them to anybody. When he was done, after studying them for 2 years, he said to everybody, now I am ready to apply the powerful secrets in these ancient books. I'm going to make use of these ancient books. So he gathered up the men in his village, and when they all came together, he announced to them, he said, my friends, there is something that I want to do based on the secret knowledge of the ancient books that I have learned. As you know, outside of our village, we have groups of bandits roaming around, terrorizing the people, disrupting trade. I mean, the criminals. We no longer need to tolerate them. We don't have to put up with them anymore. What I want to do is that I want to organize all of you into an invincible army and battle against them. We seek them out. We will destroy them. I would like all of you to join me. Now, as you can imagine, the villagers look at him and, he's this skinny old scholar who's spending all of his time with books. So they were skeptical. So one of the villagers said, you want to lead an army, right? So how much military experience do you really have? I don't think you have any. So the scholar said, well, no actual experience, I admit, but that doesn't matter. You want to know why? I'll tell you why. So he brought his ancient books with him, and he held up the book on the ancient military strategies. He showed it to everybody, and he said, look at this. I diligently studied the secrets in this ancient book. And this is why I have the ability to command an army of 1 million soldiers just by following the secret knowledge here. So because of that, because I can do that, an army of 1 million soldiers, forging a fighting force of all of you, 100 men, extremely easy, child's play, not a problem at all. He seemed so confident that the villagers decided to give this idea a try. So they signed up. They formed this army that he had asked. So he taught them the military drills from his manual, and he ordered them to keep practicing. Then the scholar took his other book on agricultural irrigation, and he went to see the regional governor. And he said to the governor, "Sir, as you know, our area has had severe flooding almost every year. And you must know as well as I do that this has resulted in a lot of suffering, many lives lost. But I have a solution for you. You want to know why? Because I have this powerful book from ancient times. And it tells me how I can lead an effort to end this problem once and for all. So if you can assign a team of workers for me under my command, we can begin immediately." So just like the villagers, the governor was also skeptical. He said, "This is a pretty massive undertaking, a very big construction project. So have you had any experience with engineering on such a scale?" To this, the scholar scoffed. "Experience? Your Grace, I will show you experience." He brought out his ancient book, and then he showed it to the governor. He said, "I hold in my hand the accumulated experience of our ancestors over 1,000 years to solve this exact problem. Its secret knowledge gives me the ability to turn a desert into fertile farmlands. That being the case, taming one river that's flowing through our area, it's easy. It's child's play." Again, he seemed so confident that the governor decided to give his idea a try. So he assigned a whole bunch of workers in accordance with the scholar's request and put those workers under his command. And so the scholar proceeded to design channels, waterways in accordance with the principles from the book, from this ancient book. And then he directed his team to start digging, implement the design. And a month passed. They were able to complete the project, and it was just in time because the flooding season was about to begin. Satisfied with this kind of progress, the scholar went back to the village. And the men said that, "Well, we're done practicing the drills. We know them really well now." So the scholar was pleased. He said, "Great, I am moving from one triumph to another. And this is all made possible by using the secrets of antiquity. We're going to march against the bandits right now. We'll bring them to justice, and we will prevail." So they headed out from the village into the area where the bandits roamed. They had no trouble whatsoever locating the bandits because the bandits were not hiding at all. Saw them coming, didn't really think anything of it, confronted them. So the scholar brought out his ancient book and ordered, in accordance to the book, a frontal assault. So they rushed ahead to battle the bandits, and immediately the army of the villagers collapsed. All the drills forgotten, the villagers started to run away, fleeing for their lives. situation became desperate almost immediately, and the scholar found himself running away just like everybody else. And there were several bandits who identified him as the leader, so they were pursuing him. So they almost got to him, they almost caught up with him, but suddenly they stopped. They reversed directions and ran the other way. So the scholar, fearing for his life up until this point, was relieved when he saw that they had reversed directions and started running in the opposite direction. But then he saw why. He saw that it was because a wall of water from the flooding rivers has swept up and was rushing toward him. So the irrigating techniques and the designs of the waterways, the channels that he created, well, they were just about as effective as his military strategies. So right before the water engulfed him, the scholar had time for one last thought. He was thinking, the ancient secrets, the ancient books, the ancient masters, they betrayed me. The end. So this story may strike you as a little bit odd because it seems to be completely against the ancient books. But isn't that what we're doing right now? Aren't we studying the Tao Te Ching? I mean, that's an ancient book right there. So doesn't this story undermine the entire concept? Is it saying that what we're doing now is useless, will deliver poor results, like the war, the battle against the bandits, or the attempt to irrigate the river to prevent floods? Is that what we're talking about? What do you think? Well, it's because of knowledge. Knowledge is the topic. Knowledge is what really has been worshipped for not very good reasons. And knowledge can be a trap. That is what this story is saying. 知识陷阱, the knowledge trap. So what is this story telling us? Well, knowledge can be seductive. For the scholar, the seduction is the ancient books, the ancient lore, the secrets that nobody knows. It's the lure of knowing something others do not. For many, this gives them a feeling of superiority. With the scholar, he certainly thought that this gave him an overwhelming edge unknown to anyone else. Now, it's not just the scholar. It's not just in the setting of the story. This story applies to us right now. Even today, people are so attracted to secret knowledge. They too want the edge. Indeed, with the books that I have published, I know that when people look at this book, this is where the story came from. It's from the middle of this book, The Tao of Success, The 5 Ancient Rings of Destiny. I know there's an appeal that people may also be attracted to it because they think that it contains some sort of secret knowledge. And that's why. That is actually why I included the story in the Tao of Success very deliberately, because I knew that this would be happening. I knew that people would be thinking in those ways. It was important for me to include it. It's also important for us to discuss it, especially in conjunction with chapter 38. So as you can probably guess from listening to the story, There's only one way to not fall into this trap, and that is to always apply what you learn, to balance book knowledge with real-life experience. That's how you transform knowledge into wisdom. Notice that is what the scholar did not do. He had a blind faith in what the books were telling him, the secret ancient knowledge, quote unquote, that will make him invincible. What he should have done was to apply what he learned, balance book knowledge with real life experience, try it out on a small scale to see if he's on the right path. You learn more from doing than from reading. So that is how to avoid the trap of knowledge, the knowledge trap, 知识陷阱. So I mentioned another term, and that was the knowledge obstacle. It's a little bit different. Let me explain what the difference is. It applies to this story as well. That term was the knowledge obstacle, 知识障碍. What is it? How is it different from the trap itself? Well, falling into the trap means you have strayed far from the Tao. If that is the case, how can you get back to the Tao? How can you unlearn false knowledge to get back on the right track? Well, here's the problem. False knowledge imposes a barrier that keeps you from getting back. And the way that it does this is by disconnecting you from reality. So that's the insidious aspect of knowledge that doesn't get talked about very much. When you are already believing in something false, it is difficult for you to figure out what is right. It's difficult to remove the illusion so you can see the truth clearly. That's another reason why in the Tao teachings it's such a bad idea to engage in debates, because essentially you are, let's just say that you cultivate the Tao, so you figured out the truth about something. You know with a degree of certainty that you are seeing the situation accurately. Well, that doesn't matter, because when you debate, you may be talking to someone who's deep in the knowledge trap, who's blocked by the knowledge obstacle. So they may be disconnected from reality, in which case there's no convincing that person. So, for instance, in 知识障碍, here's what happens. If a particular piece of knowledge do not work, is it because the knowledge is bad? Well, it very well could be. But those who are trapped and those who are caught behind the obstacle, they think that, well, the knowledge is correct, but I didn't learn the knowledge properly. It's not that the knowledge itself is faulty. It's because of me. I just need to learn it better, and then I can apply the full power of the secrets. So you blame yourself instead of the knowledge being untrue. So in our story, it is the reason why the scholar never became aware of his delusions to the bitter end. He was blocked by this, the knowledge obstacle, the 知识障碍. How can we get around this obstacle? Well, we have to always do the reality check. Let the experience in everyday life determine the validity of what we actually read in books. It's no different when we study the Tao Te Ching. You must apply. You must put it to use in daily life, and then you can see for yourself if it is true or not. And that's what I've been doing for more than 20 years. I've been applying the teachings of the Tao, even at times when I found myself thinking, this can't be right. I would apply, I would observe, and I would eventually say, Lao Tzu is right. I was wrong. I have applied what he said, I observed the results, and I can see for myself. I would urge everyone to do the same, especially now, more than ever, in these uncertain times. It is especially important for all of us to apply the knowledge that we learn, turn them into wisdom. So that is the Tao in terms of what knowledge really is and how knowledge can be converted to wisdom. I think, when you study the Tao and you get these concepts, you will begin to see these concepts everywhere. It'll be reflected in your daily experience. It'll be reflected in other works, books, movies, television shows that you come across. You will recognize the Tao, and they will further reinforce that this is really the truth. So we have a little bit more, I have a little bit more to say about 前世者 and 福理者. So these two terms are self-referential, they are meta. And what I mean by that is that these terms themselves embody the quality they describe. Well, what does that mean, right? This sounds awfully vague. So remember, when we talk about those with foreknowledge and those with etiquette, they are about superficial people who put up a good appearance. Those who appear courteous and knowledgeable at first. But after a while, you figure out what kind of person, what kind of people they really are. They reveal their negative nature once you get to know them. So initially, they seem positive. When you get to know them, they reveal themselves as negative. These two terms, those with foreknowledge and those with etiquette, are just like that. Initially, you may think, well, yeah, okay, well, this is describing positive people. But then as you read further into 道德经 38, you realize that, hey, the context is actually negative. And upon contemplation, you realize that, yeah, it could be very negative once you get to know them. So that's what I mean by self-referential. That's what I mean by meta. Okay, let's continue. There's another important concept that I am very happy to see we can cover today. So this is in line 24, the last chapter, the last character, pardon me, of line 24, 华. Normally, in modern Mandarin, 华 is a reference to China or Chinese culture. Here, though, the meaning is magnificent or flourishing. 华, H-U-R, H-U-A, 华. So, in this ancient usage, it's not exactly magnificent or flourishing. In this ancient usage, it's synonymous to another character, 花. So 花 and 花 sound different. In ancient usage, these are connected. That character means flower, and this is what Lao Tzu meant. So this is why in line 24, if you look at the translation, it'll say, are the flowers of the Tao. Now that term can lead to all kinds of misconceptions. It's important for us to explain that correctly. Line 24, 道之华, the hua of the Tao, the flowers of the Tao. That term can be misleading because we are tempted to think of flowers in positive terms. but that's not the way that Laozi used the term. Which is why I say this can be difficult to grasp unless you understand Laozi was using it as a metaphor. What Laozi meant is that the flower of the plant is metaphorically representing the superficial, something that looks good, but provides little or no practical benefits to people. Let me also caution everyone to not push the metaphor too far, because you know from real life that sometimes flowers can be very practical and beneficial in expressing a feeling to someone, giving them flowers. But here it's strictly used in the context of how the flowers of a plant, when it blooms, it's beautiful, but like for instance, during the times of warfare, chaos, and strife, you can subsist on flowers. You can eat it. It won't help you survive. It's just there looking good. On the other hand, the fruit of the plant represents substance and not just looking good. The fruit is the metaphor for using something that's actually a positive thing in that it can sustain you. It provides you with actual sustenance. So keep that in mind. When Laozi says the flowers of the Tao, he's talking about the superficial aspects, the surface manifestation, the things that are only at the shallowest levels. So let's bring it all together. And this, I think, will make the meaning quite clear. When you talk about flowers of the Tao, the meaning is not exactly the beauty of the Tao. We usually associate flowers with beauty. The beauty of the Tao, you may think of that as beauty of nature. Well, that's not what this is talking about. It's actually talking about the superficiality, and this is very similar to our expression, beauty is only skin deep. That's true. Blooming flowers will wither. Beauty will age. Beauty can fade and vanish. So beauty, the surface manifestation, will not be something that lasts. It's only skin deep. So even in the West, we have this connection between beauty and surface appearance. So the reason why this is cast in a negative light is because those with the appearance of being very knowledgeable can look good like flowers, but they're actually not practical because the beautiful sounding knowledge may not be realistic at all. So think about how you can encounter someone who seems like an expert on a subject, someone who initially seems very impressive, someone who has degrees, certifications, and titles, professor this, or some other type of expert. So that person, from the perspective of Laozi, may be superficial. Now, I say may because it could be the other way. Someone who's very accomplished with degrees, certifications, and titles may indeed be very knowledgeable and have a lot of practical know-how to offer. That's possible too. Laozi is talking about the ones that only project the appearance but without substance. The ones who are the flowers but not the fruits. Okay, that's what we're getting at. So it's important to understand what Laozi is actually saying. Okay, so Laozi seems to be very negative and down on knowledge in general. Now, I would say that he's not negative on knowledge. He's being realistic and letting everybody know clearly that knowledge can be, it's entirely possible for knowledge to not be used in a positive way. So I think that clarity is important. But now here's the question. I find that in the West, we rarely come across this idea. Even though it's one of the major themes in the Tao Te Ching, we rarely hear about how the Tao is actually has this kind of clarity of knowledge. So do we really know how Lao Tzu felt about knowledge? After all, he lived 2,500 years ago. The translations vary so greatly. Do we really know this is how he actually felt? And the answer to that, yes, we do. Due to the following, due to the fact that it's not just chapter 38, but the same feeling, the same expression is scattered throughout the Tao Te Ching in a bunch of other chapters as well. What other chapters? Well, for instance, in Tao Te Ching 39, there's this. And sagacity, abandon knowledge. The people benefit 100 times. That's lines 1 and 2 from chapter 19. And from chapter 38, we have this. Pursue knowledge, daily gain. This is line 1. And when you see pursue knowledge, daily gain, if you don't see anything else, you may mistakenly think, yeah, I'm going to pursue knowledge every day and I will gain something every day. I will gain benefits every day. It may seem like a positive thing until you see the next line. Pursue Tao, daily loss. What? Okay. So the second line, pursue Tao, daily loss, is the real positive pursuit. Line 1, pursue knowledge, is actually a negative pursuit. Therefore, when you put the 2 and 2, when you put line 1 and 2 together, you figure out that pursue knowledge, you gain complexity every day, you gain clutter of facts, information, data that can trap you in the knowledge path, obstruct you in the knowledge obstacle. And when you pursue the Tao, daily loss means a daily streamlining, a daily discarding of the complexity. And therefore, that is the real positive pursuit. So here again, there's a very clear expression on the pursuit of knowledge being not altogether a great thing. So you also have to keep in mind that Lao Tzu was singularly qualified to make this statement. So before he wrote the Tao Te Ching, he was working for a king in the royal library as the royal librarian. So who had more opportunity than him to be in touch with knowledge? So he could tell the benefits and destructive effects of knowledge. He was in a position to be able to see that as a natural part of his work. And he knew that the only way that the knowledge can be a good thing is if you actually use it for some sort of practical purpose, if you actually test it to prove its effectiveness. So this is why, because of his background, because of his observations, this is why he was able to say with such certainty that no, knowledge is not always a good thing. You got to see it clearly so you can use it wisely. That's the message. So let's continue on. Line 25, the beginning of ignorance. So this is clearly a negative description. If you correctly interpret the previous 2 lines, this line is now very easy to understand. Of course, Lao Tzu would say that those who appear very knowledgeable, they are superficial and they are the beginning of ignorance. The whole thing makes perfect sense. So the idea is simple. Those with superficial knowledge, those with the appearance but not the substance of knowledge, are the beginning of ignorance. Remember, appearance, flowers. substance, fruit. If you only have the flower but not the fruit, that won't do anyone any good. It won't provide actual sustenance, mentally or spiritually. So in life, what this means is that we gotta be careful. We gotta be cautious. We have to watch out for the people who are the show-offs, the loudmouths, the know-it-alls. Those are the people who have strayed far from the Tao. So I think you begin to see why this stuff is so interesting, I would say, why this stuff is so remarkable. It's unlike any other philosophical work out there. You won't encounter many philosophers who say, well, knowledge, you know, it can be good or bad. So now I want to delve a little bit into 26, the great person. First, I take out the last two characters of 26, 丈夫. And in modern Mandarin, if you say 丈夫, that just means husband. So this is a male term. This is not a gender neutral term. This is strictly a male term. And 大丈夫, you put 大 in front of it, which means great. Does it mean great husband? No, it actually doesn't mean great husband. Now, the context changes. When you put great in front of it, it means great man. Not great husband or big husband. You got to remember, Mandarin is highly contextual. So a compound expression may not be the literal concatenation of meaning. Concatenation means joining of two things. So you can't necessarily get the real meaning by joining the meaning of the component parts. That's what it's saying. So what is this saying about the great man? 大丈夫. The original context is the male gender. So if instead of great person, which you see me use here, translation for line 26, therefore, the great person, of course, in English is gender neutral. If you were to translate that as therefore the great man, it's actually valid as a translation. So why did I use great person? Well, the assumption is that Lao Tzu meant for everyone, male or female, to follow his teaching. And that's the reason why I've taken the liberty to change great man to the universal mankind reference of great person. In English, when we say great man, we can mean a great person. We can also assume that he meant to address all students of the Tao or all Tao cultivators. Tao cultivators are at different levels of spiritual refinement. You saw for yourself what those different levels are. From the level of the Tao to virtue, to compassion, or benevolence, to righteousness or justice, to etiquette. At all different levels, these are meant for everyone, hence great person. So the great person has a couple of preferences, which are in line 27 and 28. The great person abides in substance, that which is substantial and does not dwell on the thin shell, which means abides or emphasizes the fruit and not the flower. And that's the next line, abides in the real and does not dwell on the flower. So the great person or the Tao cultivator is very intent on keeping track of what is real, what is substantial, what is true in accordance of reality, and not what looks good. Okay, so I think that makes sense for everyone. So I wanted to say that I wanted to do like a quick preview of 27 and 28 because that's going to set us up for the summary that we have to do for today. We did not get a chance to do the paraphrase. That's okay. I wanted to talk about those two things because these lines here that you see, 26, 27, 28, are exactly the points that I want to make in the summary that I have prepared. So here's the summary. The same lines that you just looked at, that we looked at together, I'm going to say it like this. The great person abides in real expressions of substance and not the thin shell of etiquette. He also abides in real results rather than the appeal of unproven theories. Now, if you think about these lines, this meaning, and reflect back on the story of the ancient books and the scholar who pursued the secret knowledge of the ancients, I think it all comes together. I think it all makes sense. So how can you and I take from that and be great? This is talking about the great person. How can you be the great person? How can I be the great person? How can we together be great Tao cultivators? I have 3 suggestions on being great. Number 1, give others the gift of real courtesy by being fully present in their company and communicate with sincere rather than flowery expressions. So this is the antidote to high etiquette. High etiquette can be phony. Give people the gift of real courtesy, be fully present in their company, and I would especially suggest to everyone, as you're talking to someone, as you're enjoying their company, please, please do not also be checking your phone at the same time. When you are listening to them, please be fully present. And you can bet that when I am with you, I will be fully present. That is my commitment to you. That is my courtesy and respect to you. Number 2, develop the habit to think before you speak. Think about how people who like to show off are talking a lot. Be the opposite. Distill your thoughts into richer, more concentrated, and powerful words, more meaningful words. You don't have to say a lot to come across with powerful and meaningful words. Number 3, do not settle for external appearance. The flower, quote unquote, gain insights by going inside of anything or going deeper of anything. Everything looks different when you are on the inside looking out versus on the outside looking in. Everything. Insight literally is the view from within. So always gain more insights by working your way in. Those are my 3 suggestions on being great. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.